We will have a plenary presenter, then we will have 3 reactors, and then we will have open discussion.
Healing relationships represent the ways in which 2 or more people, or other living beings and objects, are connected and interact over time and place. Health is defined by Fine and Peters, the ability to function in relationships appropriate to one's cultures and place in the life cycle. Or, in the words of Kurt Stenge, the ability to develop meaningful relationships and pursue transcendent purpose in a finite life. As Wendell Berry summarizes, health is membership.
I think the relationship is more than just listening and accepting narratives with one discrete person and another. It is in the face-to-face reaction. It is the coming together and that space in between where I think the richness, the possibility lies and the hope lies. It requires, I think, something that we don't talk about very much, which I think is it requires an element of vulnerability, particularly on the part of the clinician, as we are the ones who hold power. And you were saying last night, Sergio, about this idea that we need to make ourselves human in this relationship. It's a very important component that I don't think we explicitly talk about.
The relationship that I want with my doctor is one of not only being my doc, but I want him to be my teacher. I want him to be my coach. I need him to help me be accountable for some of my actions because I'm here with him needing some help. And I know that I didn't get here overnight, and there's certain things that I need from him to help guide me through.
Relationships are important, but there are technical things we do as family doctors. That is why we are not rabbis or ministers or shaman. But I think we need to be a little bit careful because the people that will criticize family medicine will say, well, that's all you guys want to talk about, and not about, are you accountable for quality, for access, and things that need to be measured.
We broke it down into reasons why we thought the patient was not engaged, and there were several things that came out of this. One of the thoughts was that there's an expectation with some patients that subspecialty trained doctors provide better care. So the misperception of that and not understanding the value or lack of knowledge of the value of family medicine and having a family doc. So that may be one of the reasons. Also, there may be a system problem where we are really trying to be more personal and more personalized with our patients. However, the system has created this sense of depersonalization. There may also be a cultural disconnect, and understanding that there's a lack of physicians who speak the same language as many patient populations, and the diversity of the physician workforce doesn't necessarily reflect the community and its needs. And so how do we address that?
Certainly traditional healthcare has depended so much on face-to-face visits with your clinician and an occasional phone call, an occasional home visit. How can we make appropriate use of new and emerging technologies to provide, and the challenge, to provide excellent clinical care in a very new and different environment, while at the same time maintaining whatever we think is still important about relationship. And some of the ideas, absolutely being there at critical times in their lives and to know how to be there at critical times in their lives.
And our patients are seen by the system, as we talked about in one of our groups, as difficult and challenging, and they don't do the right thing, and if only they would listen to what we say. But the team helps that, because our patients look at our teams, our ACT team and our primary medical team, as their family, and we're able to help them as that. I think we need to meet patients where they are. We have to be the place of social conscience of medicine, continue the disruptive innovation described by Dr. Graham. And I think we have to have the culture of our specialty be the place of communities of solution. Integration with public health, really explicitly, and bold, integrated teams that are given the power to do what they do best. And I think we have to be present wherever that is.
You reach a point as a doc where you're trying to be everything to everyone, and it just reminded me or put inside of me this need that it has to be about more than just me as a doctor. I need a team. I need people who are capable and understand and trained and can help me help the people that I want to serve. So when our city of New Orleans flooded at Hurricane Katrina, and it shut down our bricks and mortar and our health system and all the usual places of care, including that public hospital, it was horrific, but also an opportunity for us to not just tinker around the edges, but to actually re-engineer the system, as was said here earlier. We met them on the streets because there was nowhere else to go, and because there was no public transportation, no way to call to schedule appointments. I remember the hospital administrators, we wanted to open up one of the clinic buildings that didn't flood. And they said, okay, well, that's fine. What we're going to do is we have to reinstitute the online scheduling system and get the call center up so that we can da-da-da. And we're like, no. And we literally just took the key and opened the clinic, which didn't go over very well with the administrators. But there was a point at which the trappings of what we expect out of healthcare just didn't really matter because we were under martial law. And we just needed to serve people.
So yes, trust, and I'll say it, trust. You know, why hasn't that happened? Why haven't our patients mobilized in our defense? Because most of the time, when we end up advocating, from the public's point of view, it's about us. It's about our professional interests, it's about our incomes and protecting that and some of the privileges that we have. Well, they shouldn't trust us if that's what it's about, and they won't advocate with us. And so we have to somehow be really upfront about that and figure out how we're going to let that go so we can really have the power that comes from who we could be.
I tend to give out my email to certain groups of people, like pregnant women, first-time parents, because they tend to be the most anxiety-prone patients that I have. And patients will email me and say, I have tried, calling your clinic and no one's called me back, and, or tried emailing. And I can answer in 30 seconds and reduce their fear or say, you know what, you need to take your kid to the ER. But I'm discouraged from doing that. And even in terms of electronic records, we don't have an easy way to put my email correspondent into the records. Structurally, it just makes it hard to have some of that communication.
Cost, quality, and access have been the three pillars of sort of health policy and how we think about health policy, how we research and study it. We've come a long way on cost. We've come a long way on quality. This discussion for me has shown that we have a lot more work to do on access. Because right now we are still thinking about access in terms of insurance coverage, in terms of third next available, in terms of office hours. We're nowhere near starting to think about access in terms of internet access, patient access, documentation, that kind of stuff. So it's a challenge, I think, to all of us.
One of the things I think we often think is that access is the answer to everything, and it's not. It's not the answer, and there are multiple components to access. And as we think about it in terms of a geographic location or communication via answering the phones or responding to patients' calls and emails, I think it goes beyond that. And I think about that as I serve an underserved population, and thinking about that is that if you build it, they won't necessarily come. Because you are dealing with patients in a population who feel disenfranchised, disempowered, historically oppressed, and we have significant health disparities and inequities because of this. And there's a distrust of the system, and there's a distrust there. So I think it's more about getting beyond our walls and getting to where people are. Where are the people? And answering the questions, going back to what we talked about, relationships, is what do you need from me?
Relationships are about moving from the factual to the meaningful. Does that always have to be long-term? Sometimes great relationships are forged in 30 seconds. Why do we privilege the long term? How many people in this room have lived in their same community all their lives? I've no doubt that there are some, but man, that's unusual. People move around a lot. If relationships are important to us, we have to understand how to make sense of them in today's environment and not the one before.
You know, in each and every patient encounter, however brief, we must be fully present, not distracted by the technology on our table in front of us, or not distracted by any of the other things that can distract us. So being present in whatever periods of time is what's critically important. And part of that too, I guess, is that regardless of how busy and frantic our day may be, we must promise to be present at the critical times in people's lives. And that includes taking the authority within our practice and within our organizations at large to remain the authoritative figure that says, you know what, today's schedule ain't gonna work. I've got to go make this house call, or I've got to get Joe in here because he's really in trouble, and schedule be damned. This is how we're gonna do it.
The team is so important for the time of that patient, from the time they call till they're out the door. So I don't know, they know the patients as well as I do. They know who requires more time, they know who requires less time, and we don't always get it right. And I don't always make good choices with my time, but I have home, I have other places. And the time is so important for me to stay mentally and physically healthy, because if I'm not, that few minutes in the exam room is a waste for that patient. If I'm not where I am really with them, then that's a waste for them.
I love the question that we're closing this conference with. How should we spend our time? And I think it's incumbent on us to be thoughtful about this and to actually surface those issues about what it is that's worth devoting our heartbeats to, with respect to healing, with respect to those things that only we can do that make people a little bit healthier, that make the world a little bit better. And I will feel like this conference and the Gail Stevens legacy will be justified, and we'll be vindicated in spending our time here if we can be clear within ourselves about what it is that only I can do, that if not done, makes the world a little bit less good than it is today.
For those of you that don't know Gail, many in our specialty have called him the poet laureate of family medicine. I really like to think of him more as the moral compass for our discipline. He was obviously a very brilliant and well-read man, and he conceptualized so nicely the forces that came together that resulted in the creation of our specialty. And we had the great pleasure at the 40th anniversary of the American Board of Family Medicine to have Gail come and deliver the keynote address. And he talked about a lot of these important forces that were in play at the time that our specialty was created during the 60s. And obviously, his passing was a great loss, not only for the specialty, but for medicine. And the ABFM, in trying to think of an appropriate way not only to honor his service to the ABFM, but more importantly, his service to the discipline and to the profession, thought long and hard about how we might do this, and certainly one of the things that Gail loved most was to bring people together at Keystone to talk about the important issues of the day.
Gail used the word healer and felt that we needed one for ourselves just as we desired to be one for others. He believed that we needed to be inclusive and caring, to work for the civic good, and believe in the commonweal. Gail's belief in forgiveness rather than punishment and in benevolent rather than a wrathful God was central to his work. He pointed out that we didn't need to be reminded of our failures and shortcomings since we carry those with us forever. But we do need to be reminded that there is solace in the work and in knowing that others have struggled with the tension between selflessness and selfishness, between humility and hubris, and knowing the possibility of being both one's doctor and being one's friend. While concerned about the corporatization of medicine, he feared was eroding the essential work of doctoring, Gail was always strengthened by his belief that the intimacy of caring relationships would redeem the physician and the patient and might even redeem a society.
The family medicine movement, as we know, was energized by a belief that the value of family medicine and the willingness to train its practitioners would somehow stimulate a revolution in the healthcare system by patients within medicine and in government. A revolution that would lead to broader clinical and educational reforms based on a new commitment to generalism. And we've heard about the counterculture argument. Counterculture, in one place, Gail Stevens says, to the dislocations wrought by science. I like that phrase.
If we keep our values at the center of what we do, which I think absolutely I've heard we will flex with all the change that's happening. It's the values that are incredibly important. No matter what the culture and what the manifestation of that looks like with the changing health system we're in, we'll end up exactly where we need to be. So with that, I've been honored also to be with you, to have listened, to have participated. I will leave here being a different family physician in the sense of what the rest of my career will continue to be. So thank you.
There is an opportunity for personal physicians to speak with one voice. I believe that those values are shared among many disciplines, pediatrics, internal medicine, psychiatry, et cetera, as Steve mentioned. But I think those values are shared, and I think the nation is crying for those values. So I think this is a point in time for us to figure out to have one voice to that need, and I believe we could change a lot.
Trust doesn't change a lymph node biopsy or give one skills to remove it. And trust is not synonymous with authority or fear. The patient's fear, the doctor's authority is often enough to get an operative permit signed, a consent form signed, but it cannot help our patients cope with the bad news or find the reasons they need to change. Trust is what allows a complete stranger into that protected circle inside the patient community within a community to offer the gift of hope and reassurance. That when it is time for us to hang up our stethoscopes, I hope we can honestly say that in this practice of medicine, we've had the time of our lives.
When we can feel present and empathetic, we can affect major changes in people's health. We're still doing medicine, we're still treating diabetes, we're still selecting medications for them, testing them, monitoring them, all that good stuff. But you can do that and be non-empathetic and get poor results, or you can be empathetic and get amazing results.
We are no longer just personal family physicians. We are now becoming a community of healing relationships, generating communities of solution.
It's your job to carry this flickering flame of idealism on to the next generation and hand it off sometimes that's all an entire generation gets to do. And we're up against some pretty big forces, and it's going to take a while. Our job is to not let that flame go out. And today and this weekend, I felt it flickering broadly and more brightly than it has in quite a while. So I want to thank everyone for that.
My promise is to take this work forward, to help us translate this into policy and work that will make a difference with those values to bring us forward for personal physicians for the future.
You should be the go-to specialty for personal care. Nationally, those of you who work in medical schools, at the AMCs, and those of you who work in large groups, what prescription would I give to the field? Well, one I think really dwells on your values, and that is to speak out on the important social issues. When a politician equates palliative care with death panels, the AAFP ought to be front and center on the nightly news saying that's crap. And this is what palliative care is, and this is why people want it. When states, particularly southern states with so many uninsured people, don't accept a Medicaid expansion under the ACA, the state and the national chapters ought to be able to say, these are the consequences of not providing care for these needing people. Shame on you. Shame on you for doing that, for not doing that, and for conflating that with sort of vindictive politics.
What is the political agenda to really build a movement that comes from the public at large saying this is a transformed vision of healthcare we want to see, that respects us as individual people? And I think we have to harness the things people are articulating into something that's a much more strategic and tactical movement for a true transformation in the Galestein's calling of a social movement to transform healthcare in this country.
When you are at your lowest, when you are frustrated with your electronic health records, when you don't think that you have enough time for your patients, your students, your residents, or your fellows, to remember this weekend and to not let your personal lives, your professional lives ever get boring. You all have been great. Thank you so much for coming. The weekend has far exceeded, I think, any expectations in the planning committee had. It's been absolutely wonderful. Thanks to everybody.